if you are watching this, that means you had already seen the whooping crane story, hopefully, or you've read through part of the article. And so we're not going to do a huge background on the story in terms of kind of the, I guess, info in the story, but kind of this is the story behind the story that I think sometimes is more interesting than the actual story itself. I mean, we have to cut down hours of footage sometimes. Is that an overstatement?
No, that's true. It's totally true.
So
Definitely.
hours of footage down to 3, 4, 5 minutes sometimes. And this story, to me, I think I wish we could have done a National Geographic 30-minute special, but I think this will have to do.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think we did really do a good job condensing everything. The shots, awesome, by the way. And that's why I wanted to include the people that shot this story and kind of helped me put everything together. So without further ado, Tim and Colin, if you guys could just kind of talk about yourselves, how long you've been at the station, and kind of like what this story, kind of your first impressions, I guess.
I've been at the station here for almost 30 years, shooting basically anything that you'd see on the news, from sports to news, anything. This was just part of an assignment I had one day to go to the marsh with you. And I enjoy being out in nature and that type of thing. And we got to see the whooping cranes, and it just was really a neat experience. The marsh, I had been there before, but if you go there for the first time, it's just really incredible. You come over the hill and you just see this giant expanse.
It's huge.
The marsh.
It's huge.
It's crazy.
You can't believe it's in Wisconsin. Like the first time I saw it, I was like, what?
Yeah.
This is a thing?
And then where we went, the thing that surprised me was these the cranes. I thought we would have to go in the middle of the marsh, way out. It was actually really close to where we were able to park, and then they gave us special permission down that one trail, but we didn't even really have to go that far down the trail, and they were right there.
Thank God we didn't have to, because that would have been a long walk if it was really farther back. All right, Colin, introduce yourself and kind of what you do here at the station. What do you do here, man?
So I've been working here at Fox for about a year now, a little over a year. And I didn't come from the news industry, so I've had the pleasure of learning from all of the amazing photographers that we have here at the station, including Tim. But I got to give a big shout out to Jeff Frings, because he was the guy who trained me initially, and he really gave me the base in order to do this job correctly. As far as why I wanted to do this with Eric, I've just always been a huge nature person. I grew up in an area in central Wisconsin that had cranes surrounding the home that I lived up in. We didn't really ever see whooping cranes, but there was always tons of sandhill cranes. So when you brought it up that you were working on this story, I was very excited about it.
Yeah, and I think both of you guys have pretty unique perspectives. I mean, relatively new, experienced, grizzled, chiseled veteran in the industry. And so you guys both have, I think, unique perspectives. So that's why I'm really glad I got to have two photojournalists with me, not just one. And I didn't have to do this all in one day. This was like a process that started in June. And then now we're in August is when this actually aired. So it's quite the process. So I think that's a good transition. You mentioned growing up with cranes around you. So that's kind of what started the story for me. Now, I was driving back to my hometown of Rochester, and as I was driving through central Wisconsin, here around the Madison area, much more farmland, and I saw probably 10,000 sandhill cranes. Like, that might even be an underestimate. And they were just browsing through freshly harvested cornfields. And I mean, just there's all kinds of kernels all over the place. It's free food for them, and I don't blame them. So they're all also migrating south. And a lot of times the harvest also coincides with when they migrate back south again. So I saw all of them at one time. I took some photos, but I had some photos of my own. So I did a quick digital write-up story about this later on in the week saying, hey, tens of thousands of cranes moving through the region. I mean, it wasn't like a big deal, but it was just like a Facebook article that I do sometimes when I don't have an on-air day. And it blew up on Facebook. And I was like, hey, do you guys want a whooping crane story? And everyone was like, heck yeah, we do. So I was like, okay, I guess I got to do this thing now. So that was back last fall. And then this spring, I went to the Horicon Marsh, my girlfriend and I, to do some bird watching. And we saw Grasshopper, a kind of a famous whooping crane, right at the entrance of the Welcome Center of the marsh. And it's famous because it's kind of, it was raised too closely with sandhill cranes, so it associates more with sandhill cranes than whooping cranes its own. And it was a beautiful bird still. I got to see it fly over and fly around, and it was just, I mean, it was as close to like a sign from God as you could get, like, okay, I have to do this story now. And the two species are different. Whooping cranes are all white, have black tips on their wings. Sandhill cranes more rust color to a tan color. And if you say you've seen a crane, 99.5% of sightings probably are sandhill cranes, not whooping cranes, because their numbers are quite small. But they're also taller than sandhills. They're 5 feet, and they have small red and black portions on their face. But they're the most endangered species in the world, while sandhills are the least endangered. They're the most abundant crane in the world. And Ann Lacey, one of the people we interviewed, I love one of her quotes was, "We have both the most popular and the least populated species." It's an interesting dichotomy with trying to restore their population, because on one hand you can say, oh, we have so many, on the other hand we have so few with whooping cranes. So that's kind of the background, and their populations really collapsed the late 1800s, early 1900s, but really since Archibald and Suey started this restoration work with the International Crane Foundation, that's when the numbers took off. So now everyone's caught up to speed if you didn't see the story, and now that's the background of whooping cranes. But now let's talk about a little more detail how we shot the story. And I'm going to start with Tim here. Could you go over your favorite part? So you and I, we did go to the Horicon Marsh together. So you got to see, I think, a pretty unique behind the scenes footage of things. You saw a lot of bird nerds, including myself, other bird photographers. Can you take us through your favorite part and then kind of how that began your process at the marsh?
I would say my favorite part was actually seeing the whooping cranes. I had never seen a whooping crane before. I mean, sandhills, we see them all the time, but the whooping cranes, that was my favorite part. And just the fact that they were so close to where we were able to drive. You wouldn't know they were there other than the fact that we got special access to the trail that we shot the story from. So that was neat. That was by far my favorite part. In terms of the process, I mean, it starts right. You and I leave the station and we talk about the story, what you think we'll see. The drive up there, we discuss it. Kind of, you talked about the baraboo element of the story that you were going to do. And then I just kind of play through my mind, like try to envision ahead of time what I think we're going to see, and maybe some of the types of shots that I want to get. And just mapping out, making sure it's very important we get the sound of the whooping crane. So just being very cognizant of that.
Which we got really lucky, by the way.
Yeah.
Just like perfect timing that I wasn't talking over the mic.
Yeah.
And I had my walking footsteps. And then but we still got, I mean, the sound you got was insane.
Well, and that's the thing that's surprising about it. Like when you don't really think about it, maybe when you're just out and about, but when you're trying to record a very specific sound, like the whooping crane, people are talking, their feet are making noise, other birds are making noise. Like to try to isolate on one, it can be a challenge. It can be frustrating sometimes that you're not able to, and it's one of these things where it happens once, maybe it happens a couple of times. Well, you better get it, because that's the whole point why you're there. So you have to get it. Like failure is not an option.
In an extreme circumstance, it's like videotaping the moon landing. You got to get the landing.
Right.
It doesn't matter what you get before that.
This is why we're here. If we don't get anything else here, we need to get pictures of whooping cranes and a sound of one.
And you did. I mean, looking back at the footage, you probably had, the different clips you had, some of the perspectives through the trees and everything. I guess, and one of the funniest parts to me was when you laid down to get a low shot of us walking. You just did that without, I wasn't like, hey, Tim, could you get like a low shot? You're just like, I'm just gonna get this shot. Like, why did you do that? I guess, what was your process behind the different angles and heights?
Well, the people that we did the interviews with the people at the marsh. Well, then it's the idea, you want to get people kind of in their element outside of the formal interview that we did. So whether it's, they were walking on the trail, so that seems very logical. Like, get video of them walking on the trail. Well, you got to get more than one shot for a story. You can't just get one shot. You might need 10 shots of them walking. Who knows? Well, that's just kind of one of my go-tos. Like, get the camera low to the ground and maybe get some grass in the foreground. Well, things are happening quickly. Like, it's another one of those things, you got to get it while it's happening. And I wasn't really going to stop anybody. I just let people go through their process. So I jumped ahead I'm like, I'm going to get low angle. And I got down the grass. Well, I didn't look where I was kneeling. And then you informed me later that it was
Well, I knew we had poison ivy, along
yeah.
the path, and
Yeah.
then I didn't know if you had laid in it. And after you got up, I was like, because
Yeah.
I'm the way I think, I'm always looking at plants, so I'm
Right,
like the
right.
worst to go on walks with because I
Right.
walk really slow, and I was trying to keep our the people we're interviewing entertained, just talking to them about things, and so I'm sorry. Did you end up getting some poison ivy?
I did.
He did- he-
I've had it before. I mean, I've had it before, so I know what it's like. It started out very minor, and I thought it was okay, but it kind of progressed and spread.
It always spreads more than you think.
I
you
mean, we
got it.
tried. I mean, you told me, and I tried. We stopped at a gas station on the way back. I tried to wash it like I was supposed to, but
It's
it wasn't.
tough. It's tough.
It wasn't good enough. So I had it for. It was about 2 weeks.
So we got tears. Tears are in the story.
Yeah,
We'll
yeah.
get to the blood and the sweat later.
Yeah.
It was hot when we were there.
Yeah, it was warm. Yeah.
So there was a little sweat there. And so last little thing here, Tim, when you are putting a story together like this from scratch, we were driving up, we talked through the story. I kind of gave you my background on it. Now you as a visual storyteller, you are kind of given, you don't get as much research time as I did. You have to come up with basically a lens to see the story from. Yes, you got the shots you got to get for sure, but you have to think as well when you put it together and edit it. You don't want to just have this mix mash of things, because if someone else comes to see the footage, it has to kind of make sense and be able to put it together sequentially. So is that part of your process, or you just do it instinctively now at this point?
I would say at this point it's more instinctively, but you really have to think. You see like, oh well, I got this shot of whooping cranes. There's 2 of them sitting there. Well, you need more than one shot. That's the thing. You can't put that one shot up for 3 minutes. It just doesn't work that way with a TV news story. So you got to think, okay, well, how can I vary this? I got to get a wide shot. I get a tight shot. Okay, that's 2 shots. Well, now you got to think like, okay, how am I going to make this interesting? Well, maybe I'll find a flower or something appropriate to put in the shot. So you kind of just work through these, and it's like I have a tackle box of different ideas, and you're just pulling them out of the, or maybe more a toolbox would be the way. It's just you're pulling these out like kind of your go-to shots that you go to.
And luckily, when we were there too, we had some ruddy ducks in that highway area. You got shots of that, and then a yellow-headed blackbird, which I had never seen in the wild before, because I had my camera with me as well. So we got like some really cool other birds as well, that just the Horicon Marsh offers all this biodiversity, and you were just like, oh yeah, I'll just shoot that too. Like, so we just happen to have all these really cool birds. So from a bird nerd perspective, the shots you got were so cool. I hope they appreciate when they saw the story. Like, okay, this is more
Well,
than
and
just
generally
watercranes.
you try to gather more than what you need. Ideally, you don't want to have to go back. You want to try to get what you can while you're there.
Yeah.
So.
All right. Awesome. Tim, now we're going to switch over to Colin. Sorry, you had to wait along so long.
No worries at all.
All right. Let's start with your Colin. You came with me to the International Crane Foundation. So this is a little different. We weren't in the wilderness anymore, a more controlled setting in Baraboo. But kind of, could you go through your favorite part of the story, and also kind of your process when you got to this new location? And then we'll get to the fun editing, learning process after that. But the first 2 things, favorite part, and then your process at the ICF.
My favorite part was definitely actually going to the ICF for the first time. I told this story to Eric before we actually went to shoot the story. I was supposed to go in 5th grade, as everyone at the school that I went to goes in 5th grade. And for some reason, I don't know if I was sick or if I had detention or what was going on, but I didn't make that trip. And so I had never seen the Crane Foundation
Is it
before.
because detention?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what it was.
happens.
It could have been
It
detention,
happens.
could have been sick. It was so long ago, I don't remember anymore. But I was just so happy to actually see the Crane Foundation for the first time, see all of those cranes in one place, which was so cool, and then actually seeing a whooping crane. I think as a kid, I might have seen 1 or 2 growing up, but at the time, I didn't really understand the gravity behind it. I didn't understand how endangered they were.
Yeah, we are literally that place, because it has all the species of cranes of the world. Nowhere else in the world has that. So when I first went there, I was like, this is a real thing in Wisconsin. But kind of like the Horicon Marsh experience was this huge area, dedicated to wildlife, and then the ICF, a very specific goal, something that you might expect in like Chicago or New York, that there's always more resources, that we have something so cool here. And so now we go to this really beautiful habitat because they've made it all naturalized and everything. What was kind of your process given the limited information you had and how to kind of expand on it from a storyteller?
Sure. So first off, I just want to touch on some things that Tim was talking about earlier, and I think they all relate to just being a passionate photographer and doing whatever you have to do in order to get the shot that you want. So Tim laying down in that grass and getting in thick in the ivy. I mean, sometimes when you're doing your shots, you don't really realize where you're at because you're so focused on just getting that thing that you were visualizing in your head. Same with that. He was talking about sometimes you don't always get the shots you want. I just want to give another shout out to Tim because he went back on his own time to get shots for us that we wanted, some more wide shots, some more shots that had that sunset aesthetic. And so he went out in his own time and got even more shots for us, which I think was really awesome. Taking some steps back here. With my process, I guess, first off, I try to ask as many probing questions to the reporter that I'm working with before we actually start the story, just to get a sense of how they're looking at it and the direction that they're trying to go with it. And then from there, I try to do a little bit of research on my phone while we're going wherever we're going to see if I can find out some more things for myself, for my perspective. And then once that happens, obviously we almost always do the interview first, and I can gain some more information from there because we'll learn something new from the person we're interviewing, and we get a better sense of what shots or tracks of voice we're going to put into the story at the end. And so I can try to put those shots to life with video as well. And so I think when we were interviewing at the ICF, one thing that really stuck out to me was that I wanted to make sure that I was able to capture the cranes by themselves, but also from a perspective of other people viewing them. Because I felt like that was such an important part of the Crane Foundation, was having this foundation in a place where people can really appreciate these cranes for the beautiful creatures that they are in an environment that makes it easy to do so. Because as Tim was saying, they got lucky being able to see those cranes in the wild because they were given access to a trail that most people aren't given access to. And so I think that was something that was really important to me, to make sure that I captured those shots from silhouetting people from behind and having the cranes in front of them, so that you're getting that perspective of people actually viewing them in real time.
And because we had to do this story over such a long period of time, so in June, it's not the typical day turn that some other stories are. When we were going back and looking at some of the shots Tim got and then incorporating some of the shots you got, and you began editing everything, so telling the people that are listening, like, when you get a story, what does the story look like? Is it just text? Were you there? Or sometimes you're not there? Kind of like, how do you have to then put it together for editing?
Well, I mean, I appreciate what our reporters do so much because they do bring the story to life with words. And they give us that base outline in order to build around it with the video that we get. And so the first thing we always do is we line everything up and make sure that you have your whole base set up. So all of your shots and voices from the people you interviewed and all of the tracks that Eric did himself. And then from there, I think it's just kind of easy. I mean, you look through the videos that you have and you try to find specific moments that portray what is being said as closely as possible. Besides that, you're also working on timing, flow. You want to make sure that things are working cohesively together and that you're incorporating natural sound to really bring people into that location that you were at. Which, another thing with nature stories I think is so much more fun, because we have all of this background noise of other birds and bees and winds and the cranes. The cranes calling, if you guys haven't watched the actual story yet, the cranes calling is such a majestic noise. And starting off the package that way and really drawing people in with it,
Well, you guys know how like a loon sound, like that like kind of a haunting sound. This almost to me had a haunting quality, just because it was so echoey. It's like I don't know how else to describe it.
Yeah, it definitely has it's a presence. I mean, there's no mistaking it. I mean, once you hear it, it's something to hear, no doubt.
And like the audio that you capture that is in the story, It's not like you had to turn it up. I mean, it's very loud in itself, and we were still a good football field away at
Yeah.
least.
And then was there an eagle flying around there
Yeah.
at that time? Was that the thought that the call was?
So talking with Doug Pellerin, who's one of the most dedicated volunteers I know of in any fashion, not just with the Crane Foundation, but from any kind of a citizen scientist perspective, he's just like, oh yeah, that must have been their warning call because of an eagle flying through. And I didn't even see it, but he just knew right away. It's like, oh yeah, that's a warning call.
Yep. And we were very cognizant too. They told us if we were in an area that the public isn't normally in, but we were very cognizant. We were with the experts, and they know what a distress call. So if we were bothering them or something, we would have backed out of where we were. We weren't really that close.
Yeah.
I mean, we have zoom lenses and that type of thing. We were very cognizant of that going into it too.
And I remember they were just assured that, they continued their browsing behavior. You got all these awesome
Right.
shots of them looking up, going back down,
Right.
browsing through the marshy habitat. And we didn't see a young whooping crane,
No.
but we were suspicious if there was. Later, a video surfaced of the colt that was there that we couldn't see at the time. Later on, this was early July. And that's when we included in the story, I believe Kathleen's her name, that got the video. I got her permission to use and everything. Sadly, that whooping crane didn't survive for whatever reason. I'm still waiting to hear back why. But I mean, it's part of the nature as well that a lot of these animals that we do all these efforts to restore and bring them back in their habitat, they don't make it in the end. And it's just it's a harsh reality, but it's still really optimistic based on what Wisconsin's done. It's been really interesting. Now, I guess to kind of like put a bow on this now with some final thoughts on the whole story, not to do more, but just chime in whenever you guys want about with this story. It was kind of a niche story to say the least, I guess. Are there any other thoughts that come to mind about the just whooping cranes in general, or your own process of why this story you had to change how you typically did things, or maybe this was just as was? You've done this a million times, you could do it a million times more.
I guess I lean towards that. I mean, I'd do it a million times more. I would shoot nature stories every day if I could. I mean, they're just
Let's do it. Let's start National
they're
Geographic
just fantastic.
Milwaukee.
But I appreciate Colin. Colin did all the editing, and sometimes the editing is the hardest part. I mean, just trying to. It's like piecing together a giant puzzle, and it's just. It takes patience. It takes time, and Colin, did a really nice job, and it just it's hard. It's not easy.
Well, thank you, Tim. I appreciate it.
So the editing. So, okay, all right, Colin, throwing in together some fancy things. If you watch the story, I love Christopher Nolan. I love Scorsese, all the classic, like going way back to I love Italian anything movies. I just think there's something cool about it. Bond movies as well. You had some editing tricks in there. Like, I'm going to call it tricks because there's, when we mentioned the ICF, the International Crane Foundation, instead of like having to put in quotations, International Crane Foundation, you just put the badge of their polo. That's a shot you pulled up. I think that's crazy that you thought of that. I would have never thought of that if I had edited this thing. Why did you do that? And I guess why? Like, is there a process behind that?
Sure. I think it really just all comes down to storytelling, and some things that Tim was mentioning earlier as well is that you can't just get the main subject of your story. You have to get all of the ancillary pieces that surround it. So like he was talking about trying to get down low to get people walking. Like, well, yeah, that was a huge part of what you guys were doing out there in the marsh, was walking through these trails and getting to where you needed to be. And so it's all about just collecting all of those ancillary parts of the story to create a cohesive piece at the end. And so anytime, and this is something that I think all photojournalists do, anytime that we see something that says the exact name of whatever we're working with, we try to get a close-up of it, because there's almost always an opportunity in a story where you can display that.
And you got all these great shots too when we were at the ICF of the sandhill cranes too, like on the wall. Because when we were talking about how sandhill cranes, especially in the end, if we do have a sandhill crane hunt, like in some of the southern states that do allow it, you get all these great. I mean, these are amazing photos of like the Aldo Leopold shack view of the Wisconsin River. I mean, this is like it's up there as like one of the coolest places in Wisconsin as a naturalist to go. And you just did that shot, you had that included, and they had that on the wall. So like you just saw that and you're like, oh, boom.
Yeah. And that sequence that I put in there was very purposeful on my part, just because, like I was talking about earlier, you can't always just have the exact main subject be your video for the entire story, because it gets boring. It's visually repetitive. And so I wanted to have a sequence that kind of took you out of the birds and into a more, I wouldn't say understandable environment, but maybe slightly more understandable for people being inside. And so that whole sequence that you're talking about is shot inside of the ICF around the area where we actually did our interview. So it all kind of works together cohesively, but it's also different from all the other shots that we had.
So when I watched it, like I always had this feeling of like, why did he choose that shot? Why did he choose that shot? But I had a deep like feeling like, okay, I think he did that for a reason, and that's really interesting too. Added back to your perspective of showing people viewing the birds, because it is a museum, an educational landmark. There's a Milwaukee school that was doing a field trip basically that day too. So it just goes to show the human perspective really matters. Now, I'm sure we did this story perfectly, and I'm sure we missed no detail needed, but if we could do it again, Tim, what would you do different?
Boy, that's hard on the spot.
Get a different guy to do the voiceover?
No, nothing like that. I will say this: every story that you shoot video of, you always go back and you say, "Oh, I should have got that. I should have did this. I should have." You always, every story, there's something you regret. Like, I need to do this different. Boy, I can't say it. Not that it was done perfectly, but I can't. Nothing really comes to mind at the moment.
That's fair. That's fair.
You know, sometimes it's hard to judge too. One of the challenges going into a story is like how much video to shoot of different things. Okay, we could spend half a day shooting video of people walking down a trail, but you're not going to use all that video. So you have to balance. It's a waste of time to shoot that much video, but then again, you don't want to not have enough. So it's always kind of that balancing, that's what I struggle with sometimes, is shooting the correct amount, like shooting too much of something and then not shooting enough of something that we really needed. I struggle with that a lot.
Colin, what would you have done different?
Yeah, I mean, hindsight's always 2020.
Right.
I struggle with the same things that Tim does.
It's a loaded question. I just want one of you guys to say something that Eric guy is the worst. Get a different anchor. Get a different meteorologist to do the story.
No, definitely not that. It was a pleasure working with you on this story. I mean, you made sure that we knew exactly what we were trying to do, and you're obviously very passionate about this kind of stuff, so that makes it so much easier. But as far as something that I would have done differently is, when we were at the ICF, I spent a couple more hours after our interview filming B-roll or VO. And one thing that I did was something that I've never done before. And so I put a camera on top of a monopod, which is just a long singular tripod, on top of with a gimbal on top of that. And I was trying to replicate a drone with it. And at that point in the day, I'd been shooting for a couple hours. I was a little tired. It was really hot out.
We just camped the night before too.
We had just camped the night before, a little sweaty, a little tired. And I definitely wasn't as careful with those shots as I should have been. I should have taken a little bit more time adjusting my settings and being a little bit slower with my movements. And so those shots didn't turn out as well as I was hoping that they would. And so that's just one thing that I would have changed. It's just taking a deep breath before I went out and took those shots and was just a little more careful with them.
I got one for you. Okay, something I do different. The one interview, I wasn't really happy with the interview was great. There was no problem with the interview. It was fine. I look at the composition and it was a little, like the composition wasn't quite right. Like there was like the trail or something. It should have had the person over a little bit. It was a little off. And I'll say my excuse, you sit at home and if you watch it on the news on a TV, you got a 60-inch TV or whatever people have. Well, I'm looking at a little, and the camera, I have a little 3-inch screen, not even to look. So sometimes what you see in the viewfinder, what you think, oh, that's great, doesn't really translate when you watch it on a full-size TV. So there's a lot of regrets when it comes to that kind of thing. Like it looks fine to me in the viewfinder on my little tiny screen. But then when I see it later on a big screen, I'm like, oh, what was I thinking? That was not a good idea. But so that's my one thing. The one interview, I wish the composition, I should have been a little more careful with it.
That's fair. And, with a lot of these stories, and I'm glad you brought up the point of, you shoot all these shots of people walking and how many can you actually use? These interviews we condense down to such a short story. Each interview was about 15, 30 minutes. That's safe.
Yeah.
Yeah. And with Ann, maybe even more than 30 minutes
Right.
at one point. So, you know, going through what they said and kind of looking at the script and trying to just come up with a fast story that, you know, cutting off the fat of the meat to where we could get to something that's easy to get across to the viewership. You know, if I could do it over again, I think I'd just maybe be more diligent in some of the quotes and maybe some other spots to add in there. Because at the end of the day, I hate hearing my voice as much as you guys probably do. So it's trying to use other people to tell the story as much as I can. And that's what I've seen some of my favorite reporters here, that, you know, it seems like it's almost like they say nothing. The story tells itself through the visuals and through the quotes of the interview. Those are my favorite stories. Yeah. And then, yeah, so that's what I would probably change, I guess. And yeah, so anyway, I mean, I got nothing else left unless you guys want anything else to touch on. Any comments back on some of your favorite parts? Anything's like about you thought was funny or weird? I think, you know, covered the Poison Ivy. That was funny as hell to me. It was great too to also see just their dedication to get low and kind of like your instinctual knowledge with that. Colin, day off to go camping with me the day before, and then we went out to the Crane Foundation, and then we're doing all these shots. He's like, oh yeah, I'll just stick around another couple hours. That's another funny part. Is there anything else that kind of comes to mind as like made this a weird story to do?
I mean, just weird in the sense that, like Tim was talking about, we don't get to do nature stories every day. And so that's just outside of our regular routine. And I'm just like him. If we could do nature stories every day, I would do that. I would volunteer for sure.
I'm down, man. Let's just do it. Let's just go off and shoot nature stories every day.
The only other thing I would add, I mean, the Horicon Marsh is just it's a huge resource, I think, for the people in the state. And if you haven't been there, I mean, you got to go once and just take a look around. I mean, they have the boardwalk there. It's just, it's nice. I think it's not appreciated as much as it should be.
Well, yeah. So anyway, I appreciate everyone for watching this or listening to whatever you're doing. I just think this story, there's so much more to it and so much more moving elements. The ones in the past was mostly done by myself, and we had drone footage shot by Jeff, or in some cases, it was Colin's first day that helped me get some of the ephemeral shots for the Bumblebee story we did in the spring. So, I mean, it's funny how a small world this is. But again, I really appreciate you guys' help and the way this turned out. I'm going to submit this for an Emmy. If you don't win, I don't care. The whole point is, I think this was like a love project that took a lot of passion. You guys spent free time, my free time too, and it was really great to have it come together. So thank you so much. And I'm really glad we were able to do this. So shout out to Kale. Kale, can you speak on the mic?
Hello.
Yeah, Grandmaster Kale. So anyway, appreciate everyone for joining, and look forward to more stories, and possibly, here's a hint to the next one: water. Wisconsin, water. That's all I'm going to give you for a hint. Anyway, take care, everyone.